This lesson will be on research process. We're going to cover here major steps of the research process, the scope of research proposal, and examples from actual thesis or published works. Basically, the research process involves these major steps: definition of the problem, data gathering, data analysis, and verification of the results. Schools of higher learning or universities each has its own research manual. So these are major steps that you can find there, but maybe in more detail will be in different terminologies. Here is the detail from one university that will reflect this. Formulating the research problem, extensive literature survey, and research hypothesis. These are all part of number 1. And the next 3 are reflective of data gathering. The next steps here will reflect these parts: execution of the project, analysis of data, hypothesis testing, then you generalize and interpret and prepare the research report. Research proposal will include introduction, then chapter 2, the review of related literature, chapter 3, the research methodology. This will be defended through the panel technical reviewers. Then you'll proceed to data gathering, and you are going to analyze your data and write your chapter 4, which is the presentation of the results, analysis, and interpretation. You are done with that. You write your chapter 5, you summarize, you conclude, you recommend, and that will be the whole research. The full thesis is done. We are going to look into the table of contents of a master's thesis. The preliminary pages that contains title page, approval sheet, dedication, acknowledgement, abstract, table of contents, and lists of tables and figures. Then you have chapter 1, which is the problem and its scope. You are going to have all these contents under chapter 1. In chapter 2, a review that you will do for you to know what have been done so far with regards to the topic under study. What still can you do? Chapter 3, this will be the contents of the research methodology. You proceed to the data analysis. You write your chapter 4 and then 5. This appendices should already be part of your research proposal. The background of the study, and you are going to rationalize, explain why you're conducting the study, and to make your reader understand the reasons of conducting study and the incidents leading up to the study. Your first reader is your research advisor, and the next readers would be your panel members who will help you polish your papers. They will be giving you suggestions and corrections. Theoretical framework, it's the lens through which you evaluate your research problem and research questions. It is typically required for quantitative studies. Conceptual framework is used in qualitative studies, although many researchers, depending on the university, will require both theoretical framework and conceptual framework. So in here, you identify the theory or theories to use, at least 2 theories. Know what information to include and how to include it in your discussion. So the conceptual framework this time illustrates what you expect to find through your research. It defines the relevant variables for your study and maps out how they might relate to each other. You should construct a conceptual framework before you begin collecting data. It is often represented in a visual format. So as an example, this one from the research I've mentioned a while ago. So this is how the researcher made the conceptual framework that reflects what's in the statement of the problem. So there are these boxes and this circular one here as a diagram of the conceptual model of the study. It explored on the work life and the perceived work environment of the Filipino nurses in Libya. It also looked into the implications of the work life and the perceived work environment of foreign work policies among Filipino nurses. And specifically, the study sought to answer the following questions. All of these are found here. Okay, like the respondent's profile, which include age, sex, highest educational attainment, civil status, number of children, religious affiliation, area of origin, and number of years as registered nurse. All of these are the research problem number 1. For the research problem number 2, that how do Filipino nurses in Libya describe their work life in terms of their classification, and it's also what's in here in this box. Years of stay in Libya, work earning, estimated monthly remittance, work preference, assigned department, number of duty hours per week, work privileges and benefits, vacation privileges, and overtime. Then how do they perceive their work environment in Libya in terms of the following? And that is what is seen in this particular box. Perceived work environment and all of this, professional development, staffing, nursing management, nursing process, nurse-physician collaboration, institutional support. These are all for univariate analysis, and these are now for bivariate analysis. Questions asked for significant relationship. Is there a significant relationship between the respondent's personal profile and work life? So that's why there is an arrow here, assuming that this may have influence on the work life, like your age may have influence on your work life. There are relationship between the two. So there is also arrow connecting the two. And next, work life and perceived work environment. So what's their relationship? Again, there is connection of the arrow. Then lastly, what are the findings? Implication to overseas foreign work policies for Filipino nurses. It's also reflected on the conceptual model. Now, another conceptual framework of a big study, this is national in scope. Program title is Antimicrobial Resistance Research and Development Center for One Health. That is program. And there are 8 projects under this. And this is just one of the projects. It's on the sociocultural dimensions of antimicrobial resistance in the community and surveillance of multi-drug resistant escape pathogens in the healthcare setting. So you don't need to understand all these terminologies here. This is just an example of another way of doing the conceptual framework. So there are symbols used here, like colors, red increase, blue decrease, and neutral for black. And the interrelationship between this are signified with the arrows. And whatever, as I've said, whatever is in the problem, these are problems, the research aims, and reflected in the conceptual framework. This is a teamwork of researchers. I'm in charge of number 1, to assess the knowledge, cultural beliefs, and health-seeking behavior relating to antimicrobial use among the people in the community within the hospital's vicinity. I'm in charge of that. The rest are to be done by microbiologists and a mathematical modeling by a physicist. Research hypothesis. These are HO, 1, 2, 3. So all these are null hypotheses. Null meaning there is no relationship. That's why what's stated here are all no significant relationship. These are reflective of the previous example that we had, that look for the relationships of the respondent's profile and work life, profile and perceived work environment. These are still consistent with the previous parts of the research. Now, this is quantitative research. It is about hypothesis testing, and these are the hypotheses which correspond to the previous statement of the problem. The qualitative study will have hypothesis generating instead of testing. Example, in a study on reproductive tract problems among Higaonon women in Agusan del Norte. It is funded by Ford Foundation. The research hypothesis here. Based on the findings of the study, the following hypotheses were generated for future studies. So you see the difference? Previously, those hypotheses were to be tested. This one were generated, called out from the results of the study. The design was exploratory and descriptive designs that made use of FGD and in-depth interviews. For quantitative research like this study was published in Mindanao Journal. And this study was published in Advances in Agricultural Botanics, International Journal of the Bioflora Society. And this is largely experimental research design. Antimicrobial activity of supercritical fluid extracts of two Philippine medicinal plants, Pisidium guava, that is the bayabas, and Euphorbia urta, or tawa-tawana, and applications to community health. Now, the survey, as an example, so this is quantitative. This is another quantitative research. The title, Now Adolescent Students with Weight Problems, Their Eating Habits and Nutritional Intake, Multidisciplinary Research Journal. Now, the sampling design for the qualitative research of these 47 women, 14 were participants of the 2 focus group discussions and 33 for the in-depth interviews. That's qualitative part. The quantitative, materials and methods. Used multi-stage random sampling with 148 respondents. Then the research instruments, the data gathering procedure, which are very interrelated, and FGD guide, in-depth interview guide, and this one, the questionnaire were used in the data gathering for the quantitative research given to the 148 respondents. That's for the research mentioned on the adolescent and the Maranao adolescent nutritional intake. Let's proceed to the validation of research instrument is in 4-point Likert scale, patterned after an instrument by Medscape, had to be tested with the Cronbach's alpha reliability coefficients. For the qualitative research, the validation is done through consultation of at least 2 experts in the field. Just like what's being mentioned here, guide questions for the interviews were validated by peer and by selected senior Filipino nurse employees considered to be expert in the field of nursing research. So this is how you validate your research instrument in the qualitative research. And this is how you validate in the quantitative research. It needs statistical software. Analyze your data first in a variate manner, one variable at a time. Then you are going to analyze in a bar-variate, wherein you are going to look for a significant relationship between variables. Just like the research objectives or the research problems mentioned previously, it looked for the possible significant relationships, and there were corresponding hypotheses for those research problems. So you are going to answer those research problems when you present your data here in chapter 4, and after which you're going to conclude. Now, in summary, you're going to have as a research process a statement of the problem. You proceed to the review of existing research and theory. You proceed to formulate study frameworks, determination of appropriate methodology and research design, how you're going to conduct the study, and the design of data collection instrument, whether it is a questionnaire or an interview schedule or just a guide, because anyway, you are doing qualitative. Then you are going to collect the data, after which you are going to proceed to data analysis and interpretation. This will be chapter 4. You'll present the results. This is the detail of what we have mentioned in the first part, the major steps in conducting research.